I never expected the day to begin the way it did. My name is George Williams, and up until that moment, I believed I had finally built a life far away from the shadows of my childhood. I stood in Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport, feeling the subtle rumble beneath my feet as aircraft landed and departed, except for mine. I checked the board again, blinking as though my eyesight was failing me. There it was, 2 words, glowing in harsh red lettering like a verdict passed. The passengers around me groaned, some cursed, others stamped toward customer service like soldiers rushing a battlefield. For a moment, I just stood there, motionless, letting the weight of disappointment press down on my chest. This trip was supposed to mean something. This trip was supposed to be the first time I'd seen my father in 3 years. I pulled out my phone, hesitating before typing. Flight canceled. Won't make it tonight. I stared at the message, thinking about adding more, explaining, apologizing, softening. But old habits held my fingers still. With a silent exhale, I sent it. The reply came faster than I expected. 3 words. Have fun, son. No comfort. No empathy. No warmth. It was exactly the tone I grew up with. A tone that told me emotions were unnecessary. A tone that taught me distance. A tone that shaped me into someone who left home and never looked back. I closed my eyes, and a memory rose without permission. I was 8 years old, standing in the backyard, tears in my eyes after losing a school competition. My father, Graham Williams, a man whose posture was always straight as a rifle, looked down at me with cold disapproval. Wipe your face. Crying solves nothing. When I was 12 and won second place in a regional science fair, he didn't congratulate me. He folded his arms and asked, "Why not first?" At 17, when I got accepted into a university in the United States, he didn't celebrate. He stood in the doorway, shaking his head. Running away doesn't make you a man. And when I finally left the UK to build a life across the ocean, he didn't come to the airport. He didn't call. He didn't write. So, why was I even trying to see him now? Maybe because time has a strange way of changing definitions, especially the definition of strength. I booked a small hotel near the terminal and walked out into the damp London evening. The sky was gray, the pavement slick, and the headlights smeared across the wet ground like blurred memories. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. No follow-up message. No question. No concern. Just, have fun, son. I should have been used to it by now. But somehow those 3 words, meant to dismiss, to minimize, to distance, felt heavier than anything my father had said before. Maybe because I was finally old enough to recognize the ache. I lay awake for hours, listening to the hum of distant traffic, wondering why I still wanted anything from a man who had never given me anything but hard edges. It wasn't until dawn that exhaustion claimed me, but sleep didn't last long. At 6:12 a.m., my phone rang. I answered out of instinct more than alertness. It was my older brother, Henry. His voice was tight, strained, unlike him. "George, Dad collapsed last night." My body tensed, sitting upright without thinking. "He's in hospital. He's awake now, but—" A breath, a hesitation, a wait. "He asked for you." The words echoed in my head. "He asked for you. He asked for you. He asked for you." Part of me felt something sharp, anger, disbelief, maybe even a dark satisfaction. After all these years, now he wanted me? I looked at the window. The cloudy morning, the muted light, the condensation gathering like unspoken words. A piece of me wanted to stay exactly where I was, to let him feel the abandonment I'd carried my whole life, to let silence be my revenge. But another part of me, the part shaped by my mother's softer memories, the part that never hardened all the way, told me to go. "I'll be there," I said quietly. The hospital was only 40 minutes away. I showered, dressed, and stepped outside, feeling the cold air slap my face like the world telling me to wake up. During the ride, I stared out the window, watching houses blur past, brick walls, narrow streets, chimneys, hedges. Familiar but distant, like a language I once spoke but no longer belonged to. When I walked into the hospital, Henry was waiting for me. His expression was worn, but relieved. He's conscious, he said, but weak. Different. Different. I didn't know what that meant. Henry led me down the corridor. The smell of disinfectant and quiet sorrow clung to the air. Machines beeped softly. Nurses moved like whispers. When we reached the door, Henry paused. Just don't expect the man we grew up with. Then he stepped aside. I entered. There he was, my father, Graham Williams, but not the towering figure of my childhood. Not the immovable, unbreakable presence who never bent, never yielded. He looked smaller, fragile, human. His eyes opened slowly, landing on me with a mixture of surprise and something else. Something I had never seen there before. Was it relief? Regret? Fear? For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a strained whisper, he said my name. George. It sounded like an apology wrapped inside a breath. My throat tightened, but I remained standing, guarded, conflicted, waiting, and then he said something I never expected. Your mom used to say, I didn't know how to love properly. The room felt still. Even the machines seemed quieter. I thought pushing you would make you strong, he continued, voice trembling, but all it did was push you away. My heart pounded, not with affection, but with release. Years of buried emotions rose like floodwater behind a cracking dam. I could have unleashed everything. I could have said, where were you when I needed you? Why was nothing ever enough for you? Why did you make me feel like love had to be earned? That would have been the obvious revenge. Instead, I slowly sat down beside him. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in my life, I saw a man, not a monument. I became strong anyway, I said quietly, but not because you pushed me. His eyes shimmered, because I had to learn kindness without having it. A tear, small, fragile, escaped down his cheek, and that was the beginning. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't tense or punishing or heavy with judgment like it used to be in my childhood home. It was gentle, fragile, as though any words spoken too quickly might break whatever delicate thread had formed between us. My father, Graham, shifted slightly, his breathing shallow but steady. You came, he whispered, as though it surprised him. I did, I replied, though even I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was duty, maybe it was habit, maybe it was the last strand of hope that somewhere, beneath the hardness, there had once been love. He looked toward the window, where weak daylight filtered through half-closed blinds. I used to think strength meant silence, he said slowly. No softness, no weakness, no. He swallowed, struggling with the word. No affection. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. Not yet, to bridge that gap with kindness, but I listened. For the first time in my life, I listened to my father without fear. Henry returned, stepping quietly into the room. I'll give you 2 more minutes, he said softly, squeezing my shoulder before stepping out again. 2 more minutes. Funny how a lifetime of emotional distance could suddenly be measured in minutes. Dad closed his eyes, gathering breath. I wasn't raised to love gently, he murmured. My father was harder than I ever was. He thought emotion was dangerous. It was strange hearing him speak this way, like peeling wallpaper back and discovering the original house beneath. He continued, when your mother died, I didn't know how to grieve. I thought if I stayed solid, stayed cold, it would hold the family together. A sharp ache flickered through me at the mention of Mom. She had been the warmth of the house, the laughter, the softness. She used to smooth my hair, kiss my forehead, and whisper, don't mind your father. He loves in difficult ways. But even she couldn't soften the walls he built. My father's voice trembled. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know how else to be. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. A tiny opening. A crack in the stone. A nurse entered, checking his vitals, adjusting tubes and monitors. Try to rest, Mr. Williams, she said gently. He nodded weakly. Henry and I stepped out into the hallway. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet sorrow. We walked toward the visitor's lounge, where a vending machine hummed like a tired song. Henry sank into a chair, rubbing his face. You okay? He asked. I laughed softly, humorless. That's complicated. He nodded. Yeah, it always has been with him. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. About childhood. About expectations. About the weight we both carried in different ways. You always tried to please him, Henry said. And you always tried to avoid him, I replied. We shared a brief, surprised smile. Brothers rediscovering each other. Hours passed. Nurses changed shifts. The sky outside shifted from pale silver to muted blue. Eventually, Henry went to pick up his kids from school, leaving me alone with time and memory. I walked outside, breathing the crisp afternoon air, and wandered to a nearby bench. Birds fluttered between branches. Cars rolled past. Life continued, indifferent to personal earthquakes. I thought about the years I spent in America, building a career, a home, a sense of self. A life my father never asked about. A life I told myself I didn't need to share. But now, I wondered, not if he deserved to know me, but if I deserved the peace that came from letting go. When I returned to the room, Dad was awake again. His eyes followed me as I sat. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I poured water into a cup and held it to his lips. He drank, slowly, carefully. When he finished, he whispered, "You're a good man, George." The words hit me like a sudden gust of wind, unexpected, disorienting. He had never said that before. Not once. Not in my entire life. My chest tightened. I looked away, blinking hard. He continued, "I used to think admitting pride made a man weak. But I am proud of you." A tear slipped from my eye before I could stop it. I wiped it quickly, instinctively, old conditioning still lingering. He saw it anyway. "You don't have to hide that," he murmured. I laughed quietly through my throat. A broken sound. A healing sound. We spoke for hours. Slowly. Carefully. Like learning to walk again. He asked about my work. My home. My life in America. He apologized, not in one grand gesture, but in small pieces scattered through conversation like mosaic tiles. And I realized something. Sometimes apologies don't come clean or polished. Sometimes they arrive cracked, trembling, incomplete. But they arrive. Over the next weeks, I stayed in Britain. I visited every day. Some days he was lucid and gentle. Some days tired and silent. But never again cold. Never again distant. Henry and I grew close again, rediscovering the bond we lost while surviving different versions of the same father. Then, one peaceful morning, the hospital called. Dad had passed in his sleep. No struggle. No fear. Just release. The funeral was small. Quiet. A handful of relatives, a few old colleagues, neighbors who remembered him as stern but reliable. Henry spoke, briefly. Then he nodded to me. I stepped forward, heart steady. "I didn't come here to speak about the father I grew up with," I said softly. "I came to speak about the father I met at the end. I spoke of his effort, his honesty, his late, fragile courage. And as I spoke, I realized the truth. Healing had happened. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to live. Enough to move forward without bitterness." After the service, Henry placed a small object in my hand, Dad's phone. "I think he wanted you to have it." That night, alone in the quiet house we grew up in, I turned the phone on. The screen lit up and there it was, the last message he ever sent me. "Have fun, son." But now it didn't sting. Now it sounded like, I don't know how to say, "I care. This is the closest I can get. I wish I could have given you more." And that understanding changed everything. I stayed in Britain for 2 more days after the funeral. The house felt different without him. Quieter, but not in the suffocating way it used to be. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful, settled, like a storm that had finally spent itself. I walked through the rooms slowly, noticing things I had never paid attention to as a child. A chipped mug he always used. A worn patch in the carpet where his chair rested. A faded photograph of my mother tucked in a drawer, her smile bright, her eyes soft. I held the picture carefully, as though it might dissolve in my hands. She had always tried to be the bridge between us. Maybe in a way she still was. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway one last time, looking back at the home that once felt like a cage. Now it felt smaller, contained, no longer a looming shadow in my life. I closed the door gently and walked away without the familiar weight in my chest. Airport ambience fades in again, distant rolling luggage, soft announcements. 2 days later, I found myself standing in Heathrow Airport once more. Same terminal, same departure hall, same hum of restless travelers. But everything inside me was different. This time, when I looked at the departure board and saw my flight listed on time, I felt a quiet sense of alignment, as though the universe had loosened its grip. I boarded, sat by the window, and watched the ground crew shrink below as the plane lifted into the clouds. London disappeared beneath a blanket of mist, and with it, the last lingering pieces of old pain. As the hours passed, I reflected on what had happened. My father didn't transform into a perfect man. We didn't rewrite our entire story. There were still scars, still memories that stung. But we found something in those final days, a different ending. And sometimes that's enough. When the plane touched down in the United States, the warm light of late afternoon poured through the cabin windows. I stepped out, breathed in the familiar air, and felt grounded in a way I hadn't before. Waiting for me at arrivals was Emily, my wife, with her gentle smile and steady presence. Beside her were our 2 children, Oliver and Grace, waving wildly. "Daddy," they shouted, running toward me. I knelt, arms wide, and gathered them close. Their warmth sank into my bones, real, immediate, uncomplicated. Emily kissed my cheek. "How was your father?" I didn't rush my answer. "He tried," I said softly, "and I think I finally did too." She squeezed my hand, understanding without pressing. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, my mother's old habit resurfacing like a memory returning home. I opened my father's phone again. There were only a few photos, most of them old tools, garden repairs, and documents, but buried between them was a picture I didn't expect, a photo of me. I looked younger in it, confident, smiling, standing in front of the apartment building I first moved into in America. I remembered sending that picture to Henry years ago. I never sent it to Dad. But there it was. He'd saved it, and beneath it, in the notes, a single sentence. He did well. My breath hitched. Not poetic, not expressive, not warm the way other fathers might write. But for him, those 3 words were a confession, a release, a love letter in a language he never learned to speak aloud. I closed the phone and sat in silence, letting the weight of it settle, not heavy, but meaningful. Over the following days, life returned to its usual rhythm. School runs, work calls, family dinners. But something subtle had changed in me. I became slower to anger, softer in tone, more intentional with affection. One evening, Oliver came home frustrated after losing a school race. Tears welled in his eyes as he tossed his backpack aside. "I tried so hard," he said, voice shaking. I knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "I saw how hard you tried, and I'm proud of you." He fell into my arms, crying freely without shame. In that moment, I felt it, the cycle breaking, the past releasing, the future rewriting itself. Later that night, I stood beside his bed, watching him sleep peacefully, secure in love, not afraid of it. Emily joined me, leaning her head against my shoulder. "You're a good father," she whispered. I smiled softly. I learned what not to be. But even as I said it, I knew it was more than that. I learned what to be by surviving what I wasn't given. Days turned into weeks, and the raw edges smoothed into memory. One afternoon, while cleaning my desk, a notification popped up on my computer, a reminder I had set months ago. "Visit Dad." I stared at it for a long moment, then hovered the cursor and clicked delete. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude, not for the pain, not for the distance, but for the ending we managed to reach. Because not everyone gets one. Soft emotional music rises gently, revenge. It's a word that used to taste sharp and satisfying in my imagination. I used to picture it as triumph, as distance, as proving I never needed him. But now, I understand it differently. True revenge wasn't abandoning him. It wasn't staying angry. It wasn't becoming cold like he was. True revenge was becoming warm. True revenge was becoming loving. True revenge was becoming the man he didn't know how to be. That was the victory, not over him, but over the legacy of hardness he inherited and almost passed on. One evening, months later, I sat with Oliver and Grace on the couch. We were watching old home videos of Mom, her laughter filling the room like sunlight. Grace looked up at me. "Did Grandpa love you?" The question pierced gently, not painfully. I thought carefully, then answered, "He loved me the only way he knew how, and I learned to love differently." She nodded, satisfied with the honesty, and leaned against me. Emily reached over and took my hand, and I realized I had built a home filled with what I once longed for. Warmth, acceptance, affection spoken freely. And that was the moment I knew the story had come full circle. As the seasons shifted, so did something inside me. What once felt like a wound began to feel like a scar, visible, memorable, but no longer painful to touch. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, blurred around the edges like an old photograph left in sunlight. One crisp autumn morning, as orange leaves drifted across the driveway, I felt a quiet pull, an urge I couldn't explain. I walked into the garage and opened an old storage box, the one filled with things I kept but never used. Inside, nestled between forgotten tools and old documents, was my British passport. I picked it up, feeling its familiar texture, and realized something. I wasn't finished. Not with grief. Not with memory. Not with him. Not yet. That evening, I told Emily, "I think I need to go back. Just once more. Not for him, but for me." She nodded in that steady, understanding way she always had. "Then you should go," she said softly, "and come back lighter." Sound shift, plain ambience, boarding chime. A week later, I landed in Britain again. But this time, I didn't feel tense or hesitant. I felt purposeful, like a man closing a chapter with intention instead of avoidance. I rented a car and drove through familiar roads, hedgerows, brick cottages, winding lanes that curved like memory. Eventually, I reached the cemetery on the edge of town. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the air cool and still. I walked until I reached his resting place. The headstone was simple. Graham Williams, a quiet man, 1948 to 2024. I stared at those words. A quiet man. Once, that phrasing would have filled me with bitterness. Now, I understood it differently. Quiet didn't always mean cold. Sometimes it meant unsure, unequipped, unpracticed in tenderness. I knelt and placed a hand on the cool stone. "I'm okay," I whispered. "I thought you should know." A breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves overhead. It felt like acknowledgement, not dramatic, not supernatural, just present. I stayed there a long while, not speaking, not remembering specific moments, but letting emotion move like a tide, gentle, cleansing, complete. When I finally stood, something inside me settled. Not triumph, not sorrow, something calmer, resolution. On the way back to the airport, I stopped by the house one more time. It was empty now, soul cleared, ready for new walls to witness new lives. I stood on the walkway, looking at the windows that once watched my childhood unfold. I realized something powerful. A home doesn't stay a prison when you stop being its prisoner. I smiled, small, real, and walked away without looking back. When I landed in the U.S., Oliver and Grace ran toward me again, just as before. But this time, I felt the moment deeper, like my heart had made more room for it. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Grace chattered about school, while Oliver showed me a drawing he made, our family holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. I looked at the picture carefully. 4 figures, all smiling, all connected. I felt emotion rise, not heavy but full. After dinner, Oliver curled up beside me on the couch and asked, "Dad, will you teach me how to build things like Grandpa did?" The question was unexpected, gentle but pointed, like fate tapping my shoulder. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," I said softly, "but We'll do it differently. He tilted his head. How? We'll talk. We'll laugh. We'll learn together. He grinned. Okay, I like that better. Later, after the children were asleep, I stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was warm, the sky clear, stars scattered like distant lanterns. I thought about how easily life could have gone another way. I could have become silent, withdrawn, hard, unreachable. But instead, I chose empathy over ego, growth over resentment, connection over distance. And that choice reshaped everything. People think revenge is about striking back, hurting the one who hurt you, proving superiority, but now I know the truth. Some revenge destroys, but the greatest revenge transforms. It doesn't echo the pain. It ends it. It doesn't mirror the past. It rewrites it. One evening, months later, I found myself scrolling through old messages on my phone. And there it was, the one that started it all. Have fun, son. But now, instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Because if the flight hadn't been canceled, if I hadn't been delayed, if I hadn't been forced into reflection, if timing hadn't shifted the way it did, I would have arrived too late. Those final conversations wouldn't have happened. That fragile reconciliation would never have taken shape. That softened ending would have remained sharp. A flight cancellation changed the ending of my life story. It gave me closure instead of regret, healing instead of emptiness, peace instead of questions. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, and I realized sometimes life delays you. So, your heart can arrive on time. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became clearer. I began to notice things I had never slowed down enough to appreciate. The way Oliver concentrated when he learned something new. The way Grace reached for my hand without thinking. The way Emily watched us, proud and peaceful. One evening, as we all sat together on the living room floor assembling a toy model airplane, I felt a stillness settle over me. Oliver looked up and asked, "Dad, did Grandpa ever build one of these with you?" I paused, not from pain but thoughtfulness. "No," I answered honestly, "but he taught me how to use tools, and now I'm teaching you." Oliver smiled, satisfied. A generational gap bridged gently. Grace leaned her head against my shoulder. "I like when you're home," she whispered, and just like that, a truth crystallized inside me. I wasn't repeating the past. I was rewriting it. Later that night, after everyone drifted to sleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened my phone again. Not out of habit, but intention. I scrolled one last time to the message. "Have fun, son." For the first time, I read it not as dismissal, but as effort. Clumsy, awkward, but effort. A man who didn't know how to express love, trying in the only language he understood. I nodded, a quiet forgiveness settling into place, not forced, not performative, simply real. Not because he earned it, but because I deserved the freedom that came with giving it. Life has a strange way of teaching us. Sometimes the door closes. Sometimes the plane is delayed. Sometimes the goodbye comes too early, and sometimes just in time. Sometimes revenge looks like triumph, and sometimes it looks like tenderness. I learned that the most powerful revenge is breaking the cycle that broke you. It's choosing to speak where silence once lived, choosing warmth where coldness once stood, choosing presence where absence once echoed. And now, when my children grow, they won't have to heal from me. That is victory. So, if you're listening to this, wondering whether you'll ever overcome what shaped you, know this: you are not doomed to become what hurt you. You are not obligated to carry the weight you inherited. You are allowed to grow beyond what raised you. And sometimes, the moment your life is redirected, the moment your story begins to change, the moment your heart learns a new way to beat, starts with something as simple as a canceled flight. My father's last words to me were a text message, and now, years later, I finally understand them. Maybe he wasn't dismissing me. Maybe he was blessing me. Maybe he really meant, "Live your life, son." And I am.